Good morning, students. Today we are going for chapter 4, The Making of Global World. Here, the old trade routes, Silk routes, present a good example of pre-modern trade and culture link between distant parts of the world. The Silk routes, an extensive interconnected network of trade routes across the Asian continent, connecting East, South and West Asia with Mediterranean world including North Africa and Europe. The Silk Route show importance Chinese silk in the Western world. Now, food becomes global, like some of the important foods like noodles from China and Arab traders took pasta. Many foods such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomato, chilies, sweet potatoes came from American Indians, the original inhabitants of America food known as our ancestors and were introduced about centuries ago India. Now basically potato is the become the staple food of the poor people of Ireland. Some of the diseases like the smallpox. Smallpox was blessing for the colonists. The natives were all dead. 19th century 1815 1914. Now that is the time period flow of trade and flow of labor, flow of movement of capital. Now large amount of industrialization took place in 1914. Now there is the corn law in Britain. Now due to the rapid industrialization in Britain together with population growth, now in 18th century had increased the demand for agriculture product pushing up prices corn. The government did not import food crops because the pressure from landed groups. Now the law allowing the government to do this called the corn law. Now some of the effect of the corn law like abolition of corn, railways were constructed, new harbors were built, capital flowed and nearly 50 million people emigrated from Europe to America. Now Eastern Europe, Britain, Russia, America, Australia landed was cleared and food production expand meet the British demand. Now here food grains could be imported. Their prices were cheaper than prices of good production at home. So the farmers discovered that they could not compete with imports. Emergency of global agricultural economy. 1819 global agricultural economy had came into existence. All the three flow were working simultaneously. Now for some example like the here in India taking place of West Punjab and the British government built irrigation canal transfer semi-desert areas into fertile regions. Now wheat and cotton could be grown for export. Transportation of technology and refrigeration technology. Now in the 19th century there is the development of railways, steamships and telegraph important invention. Now in the for the purpose of trade, meat is good example for connected process. Till 1870, live animals were shipped from America to Europe and they were slaughtered, but live animals took more space and many often fell sick, lost weight and become unfit to eat. Now animals were slaughtered at the starting point in America, Australia, New Zealand sent to Europe as a frozen meat. Colonization of Africa. 19th century European countries had colonized the whole of Africa. Trade flourished that brought prosperity to ruling country. For ruled one colonization meant loss, freedom and livelihood. Division of Africa, Congress of Berlin 1885. Now that is the time period. In 1885 big European powers meet in Berlin to complete the partition of Africa. That is reason countries in Africa have borders which are straight in line. In England and France made vast addition to their overseas empire in the late of 19th century. Belgium, Germany were the new entrants in the race for colonies. US also became the colonial power, taking over some colonies earlier held by Spain. Now here indentured labor. Now in 19th century, Indians and Chinese labor were sent to work on the plantation and mines and construction projects like railway and road around the globe. And indentured labor is bounded worker. He is under the contract of worker, his employer for a specified period of time. So he is paid wages as remuneration for this work. Now requirement and the procurement. Here requirement, the labor were required through the agents who gave them false information about destination, living, working condition. They work up a rosy picture, tempted the migrants. The agents were given a small commission by the employer. Now cultural fusion. The worker found many different ways to survive these hard conditions. They invented individual collective ways, self-expression and combination in different cultural forms. In Muharram, multicolored Muslims were prepared and then ritually offered to the sea. Here, Indian indentured laborers in Trinidad celebrating the festivals. Most of the indentured laborers stay on ever after their contracts were over. In 20th century, the nationalist leader protested the system of indentured labor migration. It was a cruel system. It was abolished in 1921 and the descendants of indentured laborers were called coolies. They remained in the minority in the Caribbean and many obvious Naples novels deals with emotional problems and indentured labor. Indian bankers and entrepreneurs abroad. Now that time period, source of the finance, big plantation, now owners who were growing food and other crops with the world market could borrow money from banks and the markets. Now two well known Indian banks were Sipkahir, Shikar, Puri and Sarraf. Now Natukotai Chattiers, they had their own money for borrow it from European bank. Indian trade colonialism and the global system effect of colonization textile industry. India dominated the world trade in textiles. She produced the finest quality of textile which were highest demand in the international market. With the spread of industrial revolution, the British manufacture machine made textile like cotton manufacture began expand. Now these are the area you have to see how the Alexander finding the Red Sea, and now some of the European people going for the taking the trade in US and other parts of Asia. The trade routes that linked India to the world at the end of the 17th century. Now the British industries wanted to open west market from the cotton textile in India. The Indian textile faced stiff competition from British goods and consequently it began to decline. We can see a steady decline of share cotton textile in 30% and in 1800 to 15% in 1815, and by 1870 to share drop 3%. Trade surplus. In 19th century, the value of British imports was much higher than the value of food grains as a raw material exported from India. In other words, Britain sent goods at higher rate but purchased food grains at a raw material from India at a low rate, and this was called the trade surplus. Now, multilateral settlement system. Britain had trade surplus with India. So this surplus was used by Britain in buying the goods from other countries. This is how multilateral settlement system worked. By helping Britain to balance its defects, India played a crucial role in the 19th century of the world economy. Important trade surplus to pay so-called home charges that include private remittances home by British official and trader, interest payment on Indians' external debt, and pension of British official in India. In 19th century was a period of fast economic growing on the side of misery and the higher profit, some poverty, other technological innovation, or for some of the decline industries for the other countries. The economy between the world wars. Now that is the time period, and the First World War in 1914 to 1918 and the Second World War from the 1939 to 1945 gave rise to wide economic and political instability. The First World War was fought between the two power blocs allies that compromised from Britain here now from Britain, France, Russia, later USA joined, and Central Power arising from the Germany, Australia, Hungary, and the Ottoman and the Turkey. When the broke out in 1914, people believe it was localized war, and soon it will come to an end. The First World War, it is also known as the Industrial War. Now why? Now 20 millions of soldiers were requirements sent to the fronts of the war, left millions dead and 20 millions injured. Most of them were killed in the Mehmed were men and working the household incomes and declined the war favor earning of members in the family. Now post-wars and the effect of the First World War, Britain was world leading economy pre-wars years faced prolonged crisis, and while Britain was fighting war industries and developed in India and Japan after the end of the war, it became difficult to Britain recapture her earlier position of dominance. Now effect of domestic economy. The world war had led to an increase in demand, production and employment. When war ended, production was curtailed and unemployment increased. The war expenditure were also reduced. The development led huge unemployment. In 1921, every 5 worker was out of work. Now this is the time period of the crisis. Now peoples are unemployed, peoples they do not have food to eat. The agricultural production is very low. Large scale production and of consumption. Now the war helped the expansion of the economy in US. Soon after the war, US recovered its growth in 1920. Production line.